If you collude in business or if you collude in the stock market, they put you in jail. But in politics, because it's a rigged system, because it's a corrupt enterprise, in politics, you're allowed to collude. So they colluded, and actually I was happy, because it shows how weak they are.
I don't see this as any big deal, other than the fact that I'm not going to spend resources in Indiana. He's not going to spend them in other places. So what? What's the big deal? I've never told them not to vote for me. They ought to vote for me. But I'm not over there campaigning and spending resources.
I think that is a decision, an allocation of resources that makes a lot of sense, and it's devoted to the principle of beating Hillary Clinton in November and turning this country around.
Well, John Kasich doesn't talk about it the same way Ted Cruz talks about it, but it is a deal, apparently, between the two campaigns that Kasich is not going to campaign or spend money in Indiana, so Cruz can have a one-on-one shot, and Cruz is not going to campaign or spend money in New Mexico or Oregon, so Kasich could have a one-on-one shot. Here's why they're doing it. Take a look at 3 states tomorrow, the Real Clear Politics average of polls. Pennsylvania, Donald Trump up big in Pennsylvania. Connecticut, the average there even bigger, over John Kasich in second. And Maryland, Donald Trump up big over Kasich and Cruz. Those are 3 states of the 5 tomorrow. Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard. Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Okay, Mara, does this work?
I don't think it's really going to work. I think Donald Trump is on track to get the delegates he needs, not necessarily 1237, but to get the delegates he needs to get the nomination on the first ballot. If he shows up, I think it's in 1100-ish, and I think if he shows up in Cleveland with around 1100 or above, and he's hundreds of delegates above Ted Cruz, I think you're going to see delegates come his way. I think that he'll have to get 1237 on the first ballot, but I think there's a way to do that for him. We've seen in poll after poll, big majorities of Republican voters say they think the nominee should be the candidate with the most delegates, not necessarily 1237. And what's going to happen tomorrow is I think he'll sweep the Acela Corridor primary, and every time he does that, even New York, where everybody knew he was going to win, it's just another psychological notch that tells the Never Trump people that they don't have much of a chance of stopping him.
Yeah, I mean, if you do the math, Steve, it still seems like he could come up short. He's at, I guess, 58%, almost 60% of the remaining delegates to get to 1237, but still, momentum means a lot.
Momentum can mean a lot. It didn't mean much to Ted Cruz after Wisconsin, but I think if you look at the victory in New York and you couple that with the polling that we've seen in recent days, I mean, it certainly looks like Trump is picking up steam, certainly not losing steam. And I think if you take the polling, the public polling that we've seen in Indiana, beyond the states that are coming up tomorrow, in Indiana, California most recently, he looks like he could be on track to get to 1237. I think if he's at 1100, there's a big fight. I don't think that will end up being enough.
You think it has to be higher, like 1150?
I think it has to be considerably higher. I mean, look, I think there are Republicans who would like to fight if he's at 1236.
Yeah.
And I think they have every right to fight if he's at 1236. But for practical purposes, you're seeing a lot of Republicans who had been anti-Trump or sounded like they were in the Never Trump camp who are backing off of that a little bit. You're seeing sort of this normalization of Trump with his hiring of Paul Manafort, some of these other folks. And the more that he wins, the more that happens, and the more that it weakens the Never Trump. I don't think it weakens their argument substantively, but the more that it makes their cause difficult.
I heard a lot of people talking about this today, Charles, and some said, wow, this is kind of late.
It's extremely late. Had they worked this out a month or two ago, where they each go one-on-one, Trump has said, I want to go one-on-one with Cruz, well, he'll get his chance in Indiana, but we're really at a point where this is the end game. You know, Earl Weaver once said momentum is tomorrow's starting pitcher, meaning there is no momentum. It depends on where you are tomorrow. The thing is, there's no tomorrow, really. This is a last attempt to try to stop the momentum. It means something. I think the result of the New York vote, 61%. I mean, a huge blowout. And if you get the 5-state sweep on Tuesday, you've got a candidate on the road coming into Cleveland. If he's on a roll, I think Mara's right. He could be 50 away, maybe even 100 away. And there'll be a sense that the people want him. You got to go with the people. And that's what the momentum will mean. this can work to the extent that if he stopped in Indiana, if Cruz is strong enough to do that, that could have a psychological effect. I think everybody says it's all about numbers and numbers. No, it's about what the sense is, what the people want in a broad sense. And if you stop him in one place, or if you do it in California, then I think you can have a fight on the floor that looks like it's a legitimate fight.
But Indiana is the next big moment in this race. Fair to say?
Yep, fair to say. And I think that Cruz and Kasich, if they want to stop Trump, were smart to try to do this. The question for Indiana is, can Cruz replicate what happened in Wisconsin? And in Wisconsin, you had a pretty unusual situation. You had a governor. You had a well-respected speaker who, while he didn't endorse, it was pretty clear where he was at. You had all these talk show hosts who are lined up against Trump. You had a lot of forces against him. I don't know if that's going to be the same thing in Indiana.
And Trump made the tactical mistake of running again.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
The governor not understanding quite how popular.
Well, you
The
haven't
latest
had...
poll in Indiana, and there's not a lot of polling in Indiana, is the Fox poll on Friday, which had Trump up 7. You take Kasich out of that equation, and it's a 2-point lead for Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was likely to be, even if there was, this deal never happened, I think it was likely to be much tighter than that. Indiana, there are a lot of reasons to believe that Indiana could be a friendly state to Ted Cruz. But look, it is the case that the people will have, to a certain extent, spoken if Trump heads into the delegation, into the convention with the most delegates. It's also the case that 60+% of Republicans haven't voted for Trump, and of that group, a significant number, I would argue a plurality of the people who haven't voted for Trump, have said they're never going to vote for Trump. They're not going to vote for him, period. That is a huge problem for the Republican Party going forward. And
yeah, but I guess their argument is that no single candidate gets more than Trump.
No, it's a totally fair argument. I mean, it's a perfectly logical argument. I just think we have to be pretty careful. There are a lot of people, particularly Trump supporters, who throw around the phrase "the people" as if everybody's spoken and this is an overwhelming win. There are huge numbers of people who don't support Trump and will not support Trump in Cleveland.
Even if the choice is Hillary Clinton, you think those people are going to stick to their guns the whole way?
This is not a normal election that way.
On this issue, let's take a listen to one of the Koch brothers this weekend on this issue.
You couldn't see yourself supporting Hillary Clinton, could you?
Well, we would have to believe her actions would be quite different than her rhetoric. Let me put it that way. So on some of the Republican candidates, before we could support them, we'd have to believe their actions will be quite different than the rhetoric we've heard so far.
Well, that kicked up a storm. Hillary Clinton said she didn't want any money from the Koch brothers at all.
I'm sure if the Kochs offered money anonymously and untraceably, she'd probably say yes, but she can't do it in public. Look, with the Koch brothers, it's not quite as shocking as people think. They are rather libertarian in their thinking. Trump would be anathema to them. He's a big government guy. And Cruz, who's a small government guy, nonetheless is very, very anti-libertarian in a sense on social issues. So for them, it's a dilemma. If you hear them, however, saying that they could actually not support the top two, I think that reinforces what Steve is saying. There are a lot of Republicans who will stay home or write in or do something else, and that is a threat, which is why I think this idea of the people's choice is a matter of perception. I'm not saying I defend that argument. I think you got to win the majority, but nonetheless, it will be seen as illegitimate if it's taken away when he's that close.
But to Mara's point, the unifying figure in the Republican race is Hillary Clinton.
There is no unifying figure in the Republican race. Hillary Clinton will be unifying to a certain extent. She can't overcome what Donald Trump is and has done for many Republican voters.
But you listen to the focus groups that the Walmart moms or the ones Peter Hart has done with Republican-leaning women. They all say that they dismiss the things Donald Trump says. I think you're going to find a lot of people coming around to Trump.
Exit polls pretty consistently showed that people who said that they would strongly consider a third-party candidate if it were a Hillary Clinton-Donald Trump head-to-head matchup, number between 35 and one state was 43%. You can't just shrug that off. There are people who object to Donald Trump both on ideological grounds, as Charles says, he's big government, and on principle grounds. They think he's not a man of integrity or character. Those people are not going to change their minds.
We will see tomorrow how things stack up.